Our primary purpose in Part 2 is to add some new physical analysis into the public record. But first, let's dot some I's and cross some T's. Again, our focus here is what caused the collapse of Building 7. Both the Aladdin and the Everglades hotels were destroyed with a controlled demolition. This is a matter of public record. And the evidence says that World Trade Center 7 was destroyed by a controlled demolition as well. Beware of arguments that say that just weakening steel with fire under 1500 degrees could have caused this collapse. It is simply not possible. Even if we grant that such a fire could weaken a single beam enough to cause a snap, the symmetric nature of the fall requires that every beam on an entire floor would have had to collapse at almost the exact same moment in time. And then, this sequence of events must have been repeated over several floors. In other words, the temperature and weight-bearing history of each beam on a floor must have been the same. Again, this could not result from a sparse, asymmetric exposure to fire. For example, it is clear from the video evidence that some beams were not exposed to any fire at all. In effect, whoever implemented the controlled demolition did their job too well. It is obvious by watching the roof line stay flat during the fall that this collapse was not due to a natural phenomenon. Let me mention a brief aside here. As you dig into the facts, you'll start to notice that good men and women all over the world have added their honest perspectives and insights into this controversy, sometimes only to be ridiculed. Do you really think all these good, intelligent people would have risked their reputations if this was a close call? No, they wouldn't. And as you will see on your own, the evidence all points to a controlled demolition. Whoever perpetrated this crime is scared to death of you. Scared that you will impartially look at this evidence and find things out for yourself. Okay, let's get started with the physics. First, I want to acknowledge the work of Mr. David Chandler, a physics teacher who provided the starting point for my analysis. Great work, David. A link to this work is provided at the right. For those who wish to learn more about the analysis tool utilized, a free program called Physics Toolkit, I highly recommend David's videos. Now let's jump to the starting point of my analysis by looking at David's velocity versus time plot for characterizing the fall of World Trade Center 7. I have defined two time periods, T1 and T2, which border the interval while the building was in free fall. The time period and slope is further highlighted by the green arrow. As David mentions, the slope of the curve represents the acceleration, which David showed to be equal to free fall, something the official investigation has finally admitted. Let's fully understand what free fall means. For all intents and purposes, during this interval, the top of the building was falling as if several floors of support columns were turned to tissue paper as regards their ability to impede the fall. Please note, an important scientific principle has now been satisfied: repeatability. That is, David's work was independently duplicated and similar results were obtained. Now let's look at the equations of motion to glean some more information. In particular, look at the time periods T1 and T2 on the slide. From the equations, we can deduce the distance fallen between time T1 and T2, which turns out to be about 33 meters or a little more than 100 feet. Therefore, the columns associated with about 8 to 10 floors of the building below the roof went from being able to support the roof to catastrophic failure within seconds or a fraction thereof. It is important to emphasize the use of the word simultaneous. Because the fall of the building was symmetric and flat, all columns on each related floor were taken out at almost exactly the same moment in time. I need to get a little more technical here for just a minute or two to make sure that I get the required information in the public record. Please bear with me while I quickly document the findings. First, let's return to the earlier plot and note that I've introduced several additional colored arrows. As a thesis, the red arrow corresponds to the period when explosives, or incendiary devices, took out multiple floors of columns, and the green arrow is the period of free fall, which we just showed was related to the number of floors taken out. The yellow arrow represents the period of time when the top of the superstructure collides with the portion of the building that was not removed, the pile driver effect. Noting that energy is related to mass times velocity squared, we can deduce that for maximum effectiveness in building demolition, taking out the lower floors would maximize the mass, and the more floors taken out, the higher the velocity at point of impact, time t2 as shown. In demolition, you optimally want the building to do as much of the work as possible. Again, the period associated with the yellow arrows. The blue arrows simply represent the fact that eventually downward velocity will be driven to zero at the Earth's surface. It occurred to me that this four-part process was likely to be a characteristic signature of demolitions in general, so I looked for case studies to examine. The next plot shows results from the video analysis of 2 points on the Aladdin Hotel, a known controlled demolition. We see a rather precise duplication of the WTC7 demolition signature for both points on the hotel. Note that the fall is time separated by about a second on the two sides of the building, which was likely done by the demolition team as a result of detailed analysis. For example, the mass of the two sides were likely different, requiring a different sequence and placement of charges. Several other controlled demolitions were analyzed with similar results. For brevity, they have not been included. Overall, it was a rather simple exercise that many of you in the audience are invited to duplicate. In summation, we have shown that the World Trade Center 7 had the characteristic signature of a controlled demolition, and that the simultaneity of destruction implies that it was not a random work of nature, but again that it was an intelligent and diabolical controlled demolition. Please take the time to browse the links at the right to begin your own journey of discovery. Your opinion matters. United we stand, divided we fall.